Today, we're going to dive into a fascinating book from the 14th century, a book that was born out of a real crisis of knowledge. It's a guide to ethical living that, honestly, still shines incredibly brightly today. So let's start with a big question. What happens when learning, when knowledge itself just kind of loses its way? When it becomes an end in itself and gets totally detached from the real world problems and moral questions that people are facing every single day? Well, back in the 1300s, this wasn't just some hypothetical idea. It was the reality for Jewish scholarship. You see, the whole intellectual world at the time was in a bit of a crisis. The study of the Torah, which is supposed to be this ultimate guide for life, had somehow become disconnected from people's actual spiritual and ethical needs. For a lot of folks, it had just lost its purpose. And this really breaks down the problem perfectly. On one side, you had scholars who were totally lost in what's known as pilpul. These are incredibly complex, almost hair-splitting legal debates that were way more of an intellectual exercise than any kind of practical guide. And on the other side, a huge area of neglect. The core ethical values, the spiritual guidance, the stuff people desperately needed. But right in the middle of all this confusion, one voice rose up with just stunning clarity. And that voice belonged to a man named Rabbi Isaac Abuhav, a scholar who was not afraid to call it like he saw it and offer a really powerful critique of his own generation. And he did not mince words. This quote just captures his frustration so well. They hold the tilting details and abandon the true principles. I mean, he saw his peers getting lost in the weeds, debating these tiny points of law while completely missing the huge foundational principles of faith and morality. For him, this wasn't just inefficient, it was a profound spiritual failure. So what was his solution? Well, he wrote a masterpiece of ethical instruction called Menorah HaMaor, which translates to the candelabrum of light. His whole goal was to light up a new path forward, not by inventing something totally new, but by going back to an ancient, powerful way of teaching. And the key to his entire method lay in this concept of Agada. Now, what is that? It's all the rich, non-legal stuff in the Talmud, the stories, the legends, the ethical discussions. Rabbi Abuhav made this really sharp observation that while all the complex legal debates were losing the public, people were still deeply, deeply drawn to the power and wisdom of these narratives. But the crucial part is how he used these stories. He came up with this brilliant three-step method. First, he'd kick things off with a captivating story from the Aggadah that everyone knew and loved. Second, he'd use that story to teach a core ethical principle. And then, and this is the absolute masterstroke, he would ground that principle in practical Jewish law, or halacha. He made it directly relevant to people's actual lives. All right, to really see how this all works, let's take a look at how Menorah HaMaor teaches one of the most difficult virtues out there, humility. Now, the conventional wisdom of the day, which was drawn from Greek philosophers like Aristotle, was all about the golden mean. The idea is pretty simple. Virtue is in the middle path between two extremes. So courage, for example, is the perfect balance between being reckless on one side and being a coward on the other. This was the standard way to think about it. But this is where Rabbi Abuhav makes a really radical break. When it comes to something as corrosive as pride, he argues that the middle path is just not the answer. No, he says you shouldn't hold on to any of it, not some of it and not a little of it. For something this destructive, he believed that even moderation is a mistake. And to really hammer this point home, he pulls out this quote from an older source, Rabbi Levitas of Yavna, and it is this stark, unforgettable line, "Be very, very humble, for the hope of man is the worm." Wow. The message is just crystal clear. When you're fighting pride, you have to go to the complete opposite extreme of humility. You have to make sure that not even a single trace of arrogance can possibly survive. So Rabbi Abuhav's work wasn't just some bestseller in its own time. Its impact was way more profound than that. It created a legacy that would echo for generations, which explains why this candelabrum of light is still shining so brightly today. So why did it have such incredible staying power? Well, it became this amazing repository of authentic Jewish thought, offering a direct line to the ethical wisdom of the Talmud, and this was revolutionary. It armed community leaders with rich, original material, which freed them from having to rely on the frameworks of foreign philosophies like from Plato and Aristotle. It gave them a way to talk about morality that was deeply, authentically rooted in their own tradition. And ultimately, it just served as a timeless, systematic guide to living an ethical life. And all of this brings us right back to where we started. Rabbi Abuhav saw a world that was just drowning in tilting details while completely ignoring the true principles. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? In our own age of endless information, constant updates, and just infinite distractions, how do we make sure that we're focusing on the principles that truly matter? It's a question from the 14th century that feels more relevant right now than ever before.